Nutrition Chapter 4, Carbohydrates. Our carbohydrates are carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Simple sugars are the mono and disaccharides. Our monosaccharides are the glucose, such as dextrose, the fuel for the brain. Our fructose is found in soda as our fruit sugar. And then galactose is our lactose in milk. When we look at carbohydrates, we know that rice is the #1 carbohydrate in Southeast Asia. In South America, corn is the #1 carbohydrate, cassava in Africa. Europeans and Northern Americans consume the most wheat, and if you travel to Hawaii, poi is their carbohydrate of choice. Plants use the sun to make carbohydrates. In Iowa, our main carbohydrate is our corn, and that process from the sun is called photosynthesis. We have 6-carbon chemical formula. It's C6H12O6, and that's arranged differently with reverse OH and H groups. Glucose is that only fuel that's used by the brain. Fructose is used in the high fructose corn syrups, and as I said, soda is the #1 consumption for that. When we look at some of the other derivatives, pentoses and sugar alcohols are derived from our simple sugars and monosaccharides. Our disaccharides are those two linked sugar units together. Sucrose, lactose, and maltose are all derivatives of these disaccharides, all of them containing the glucose plus one other. As we look at the cleaving and joining of these sugar molecules, condensation forms disaccharides by removing the hydrogen or the OH and having one sugar or another form. And then as we look at hydrolysis, we can see then that the water or the H2O breaks off from that. Complex carbohydrates, aglio means scanty, poly means many. Our polysaccharides are those long chains of glucose found in our grains, fruits, and legumes. Very healthy and good for you. When we talk about complex carbohydrates, it's a good thing in the diet. The way monosaccharides are linked make them digestible or starch, or non-digestible, such as our fibers. Plants store energy as starch that's used during growth and reproduction, and starch then is that storage form of a carbohydrate in a plant, either as an amylose or an amylopectin. Starch adds the moisture and the gelatinous texture to many of our foods. Think about that sticky baked potato or that sticky pasta when you go to cook that. And we know that if you can or freeze corn in the summertime here in Iowa, that sticky fiber sticks to the floor, it sticks to the electric knife, anything you're using with those carbohydrates. Corn is a very rich, complex carbohydrate, often seen in the diet. As we go on and look then at more of the complex carbohydrates in the form of fiber, we know we have dietary and functional fiber that bring up a total fiber. Indigestible chains of the monosaccharides found in fruits, vegetables, and legumes. Our dietary fiber, again, is non-digestible, and that's in plants. So there's no fiber in animal foods. That's why a balanced diet of some animal foods along with lots of plants, fruits, and vegetables are recommended. Functional fiber is non-digestible carbohydrate that does have a beneficial physiologic effect on humans, and then the total fiber is both dietary and functional. They resemble starches but not digested by the GI tract. Dietary fiber also often is called that roughage, and our functional fiber sometimes added to foods to give us healthful benefits for that. So foods with increased fiber, we think about, what are foods that we consume that have fiber in them. Our complex carbohydrates in the form of fiber come in other types. We know cellulose is your plant wall that gives that plant strength and rigidity. And when we eat like celery, it's stringy. There's a lot of fiber in that. The pectins are found in the sugar, and they help keep the shape of that fruit. Like in the apples, it's kind of the cement that holds it together. And then our lignans, glucans, those are the thick gel-forming fibers that hold the plant cells together. So all of these help give some shape and function to our vegetables, and in humans that is the form of fiber that we need. We know an apple a day keeps the doctor away, and that should say, pectin is really what it is. It adds firmness to our jellies, jams, and things that we make in the summer for our canning as well. Carbohydrate digestion and absorption starts in the mouth with the salivary glands that give us amylase that starts digesting your carbohydrate. Not much going on in the stomach, but it picks up again then in the small intestine as the pancreas gives us that pancreatic amylase breaking down. The microvilli then grab the maltase, sucrose, and lactase, and then the bacteria in the large intestine are a result of carbohydrates, and sometimes that bacteria comes out in the form of flatulence. People that eat carbohydrates sometimes will experience bloating and gas after a meal. Carbohydrate digestion and absorption, again, then is seen throughout. It starts in the mouth, and we know then because the stomach has that acidic environment, it halts or stops the amylase action, and there's no breakdown of carbohydrates in the stomach. The bonds that link the glucose molecules in complex carbohydrates are glycosidic bonds, and those alpha and beta bonds then break down. The human enzymes easily break down our alpha bonds, and we don't really have enzymes that break down the beta bonds in the body. There is a preparation you can buy, an enzyme preparation called Beano, that you take before eating, and it helps break down those oligosaccharides into monosaccharides. Beano is a product that helps with the flatulence or the gas buildup after eating carbohydrates. When we look at absorption, we know fructose has facilitated diffusion, slower absorption of glucose and galactose for that, and it travels to the liver via the portal vein so that we can get the glucose and energy to the liver where it is needed for the body. As we look at carbohydrates in the body, we know many chemical processes go, even burning fats. We need some kind of glucose in the body. As we look at insulin and glucagon, those are those hormones that the pancreas makes. They help regulate the blood sugar, with the insulin lowering the blood sugar and the glucagon increasing the blood sugar. Preventing ketosis, we know that ketone bodies are molecules that are formed when you don't have enough carbohydrates in the body. The body will break down or metabolize fats, and ketones are a byproduct of that fat breakdown. With more ketone bodies produced and no carbohydrates, we break down the protein, and it gives us, and fats, it gives us ketosis. Those become risky when you have people taking the Atkins diet because they do not have very many carbohydrates in their diet, and so their body has to go to the proteins and fats for the energy in the body. As we look at carbohydrates in the body and regulating the blood glucose, we know that a normal blood sugar fasting should be about 70 to 110. Hypoglycemia, a person is usually shaky, weak, and hungry. They get a headache. I know I get a headache when I don't have enough to eat, and I'm starting to feel a little hypoglycemic. It can be caused from many things, including not eating, but also too much exercise or an overdose or too high of a level of insulin given. Hyperglycemia, a person will feel sluggish and confused. They don't have enough insulin produced, or their cells aren't opening to let the insulin in to do its thing for this energy, the glucose, into the cells. As I said, when you have increased blood sugar, the beta cells in the pancreas release that insulin that helps with the affinity or unlocking the cells for glucose to be used. And with low blood sugar, the alpha cells in the pancreas make glucagon, release it to stimulate the breakdown of glycogen, to stimulate what we call gluconeogenesis. Neo in the middle of that word means new glucose being made from that protein. When we look at the glycemic index, we know that is the effect of the food on the person's blood sugar, and people that eat starchy foods like potatoes, corn, rice have very high glycemic indexes that affect the blood sugar. When we want to regulate the blood sugar, then the body makes hormones that have an effect on our glucose levels. And when we do not have or inadequate regulation of blood glucose levels, it's a condition called diabetes mellitus. Type 1, the person is insulin dependent. Type 2, they usually can be controlled with diet, exercise, and making some other lifestyle changes. Untreated, we see a lot of problems for the diabetics, such as higher rates of strokes, higher rates of poor wound healing, retinopathy or damage to the eye, neuropathy, damage to the nerves, and then our nephropathy, which is damage to the kidneys. Our carbohydrates in the diet should be about 45 to 65% of our daily intake. And as we choose carbs, we need to make sure that we are choosing carbohydrates wisely, getting the whole grains because they're a good source of fiber to help lower cholesterol. They also help regulate our blood sugar, help us feel full longer. And then when we get the whole wheats and the whole grains, we know then that we are getting the endosperm, bran, and husk, all parts of that carbohydrate that are very important for the diet. When we eat refined foods, that removes that outer husk and bran, and we lose the fiber and many of the vitamins and minerals that are beneficial. With enrichment, we add this good stuff back. Enrichment is your iron, thiamine, riboflavin, niacin. We are not able to add the fiber back in, and so enrichment doesn't really help the fiber levels in many of our foods. And as we look at carbs in the diet, we know we need to moderate the amount of sugar, the less white sugar added. It's actually better to use brown sugar or some of your honeys instead of just the white sugar, and limit soft drinks. Instead, choose fresh fruits and vegetables. As we look at some of the nutritive sweeteners, we know that they are used in many products, and there are people with conditions such as phenylketonuria or PKU that cannot metabolize these products. The amino acid phenylalanine is not sufficient in their body. Carbohydrates in the diet that are natural: honey from bees, maple syrup from trees. Those are both very sweet. They increase your blood sugar, but they are natural sources of the carbohydrates in the diet. They're made from photosynthesis, and that sun is that ultimate source of energy for our carbohydrates. When we look at fruits, we know that a ripe fruit is much sweeter, but it also increases your blood sugar more than a less ripe fruit. So if you think about when you go to make your banana bread, you use the really ripe bananas because they are sweeter. They have more natural sugar in them. In looking at health and carbohydrates, we know that sugar is very popular in the American diet, but it also contributes to dental caries. If we would increase the fiber in our diet, we would hopefully see less rates of obesity because soluble fiber makes you feel full longer. Diabetes type 2 is on the rise, so increasing appropriate amounts of carbohydrates would help control the type 2 diabetes, and the obesity and type 2 diabetes kind of go hand in hand. The cardiovascular diseases, we know that they are lower when we have people that eat more fiber and more of the carbohydrates that are the rich sources of fiber. And then our negative effects of too much fiber can be constipation and bloating, dehydration, and then decrease intake in calories because you're so full on the fiber that you don't have any appetite to eat other things. So an important part of adding fiber into the diet is to make sure that you drink more water. Fiber does attract water. It makes you feel full longer, but you also need to increase that to prevent constipation. An apple a day keeps the doctor away, and that has been an old-time saying that we've seen for a long time. Our cellulose is that non-digestible part of a plant, and as we increase our fiber in our diets, we need to do it sensibly. Start small and add small amounts of fiber into the diet so to allow it to adjust and not increase the risk of constipation. This ends our Chapter 4 PowerPoint for today. Thank you.